Could have been. Rookie mic mistakes, all apologies. All right, I'll go ahead and continue. So back to what I was saying, so hopefully I can identify some things that that maybe you, even if you are as an organization, are utilizing purple team, that you're missing a little bit out of, maybe some of the additional benefits that you can get from purple teaming in your environment or as an organization. And then so just some more things we can do with it to improve our team's workflows, build a playbook for your teams to utilize during live ops. So what is purple teaming, right? First, I will start by kind of defining, give you a little background of, traditionally what purple teaming has been made up of and how it's being done. So, purple teaming is done by emulating a technique or a series of given techniques in a controlled environment. What that does is allows the team to kind of observe those techniques, actually be able to write a detection for that technique or identify a gap where maybe I don't have enough data being collected to capture and observe and write a detection or an analytic for this technique. But essentially it's complete transparency, right? It is not blue versus red at all. There's not pitted against each other. It's essentially either a person or persons going through both of those functions, emulating that technique as if you were a red teamer, but at the same time knowing exactly what's coming across the wire so that you can observe it as a blue teamer, and then have the opportunity to better detect that technique in the future. So purple teaming is not overseeing a red versus blue exercise. So I did a lot of research as I'm going into this talk, kind of making sure I'm not a crazy person, that what I think about purple teaming and how it exists. And I did see a few times reference like, you get the definition of red, blue, and purple teams. And one of the things I saw every once in a while in an article, is the mention of purple team just facilitating good exercise of red versus blue. And that's not really what purple teaming is at all. Purple teaming removes that competition factor and really just combines those teams into making them one unit that's just meant to collaborate, write better detections than you currently have, give yourself more coverage of these techniques than you currently have, or maybe identify gaps where you're not able to have that coverage. Not necessarily, not facilitating a red versus blue. We have white cell and things like that that are, serve that purpose in an exercise environment. So just a quick comparison, red team obviously acting as the adversary. Their goal, is to achieve actions on objectives and should be to create training for blue, right? So accurately emulate some kind of threat, and try and beat blue team. Red team always attempting to evade blue. It's kind of a I want to win, I don't want to lose kind of thing. So blue team traditionally, obviously the defenders in that equation, they're going to observe, report on those techniques that they've seen, and then they're going to take action, whatever the exercise outlines for what you're supposed to do when you observe that red activity. But those teams are pitted against each other, and that effort of I'm trying to bypass you, or I'm trying to stop everything you do, or whatever, is kind of what purple teaming removes by, like I said, combining those teams into one unit, one function, right? So you can either be purple teaming, you can be the person on the keyboard that emulates the technique and the one on the other side of the keyboard that's helping write that detection, right? So it just removes that competition factor. It really allows you to thrive in getting to see everything that you've done on the environment as a red teamer, or just being able to see that technique in full as a blue teamer because you fully expect it to come at you, right? Like what technique's being emulated. It's been identified that these are the techniques you're going to cover in a session or an activity or anything like that. So how is purple teaming done? One really, really important step purple teaming is that you need to choose a framework. So, and the reason I say that is because you need to have that list of techniques that you as a purple team need to be able to emulate, right? You need to be able to decide whether you can detect it, how you detect it, or where those gaps are. And so to have those techniques identified somewhere, we would utilize a framework for that. So we use MITRE attack. I think it's the most, a cumbersome framework that we have out there that fully accurately defines all the different techniques that are possible from an adversary all the way from initial access, to exfiltration. MITRE has over like 200 techniques, so obviously this is not something where you're choosing a framework and you're going to go sit down and in one session you're going to think that you're going to be able to emulate and then write detections for all those techniques or write analytics for those techniques if it's something you're needing to hunt for. But then at the same time, it's something you can break up into different sessions and over time kind of achieve, mapping out that entire matrix and what your capabilities are against those techniques. So how do we emulate those techniques? So there's a lot of open source tools out there, right? So there's PowerShell Empire and Puppy and Coadic, all these things that have been created that really make it easy to facilitate you emulating an adversary. It's something red teams use often. Now obviously there's paid tools out there as well that can do all this, but just list some open source ones there. They're easy to grab, really easy to use, but they are more manual, right? So then as you can see in that next bullet, there's actually been a lot of development more recently on automating that red team side of it, which is really, really helpful in an organization that's trying to cover a lot of techniques, or just say a small organization may not have the same kind of manpower or time to dedicate. So you can use those frameworks to then fully automate at least the majority of those attack techniques, right? So we got an example like Uber Meta Project, MITRE's Caldera, Red Canaries, Atomic Red Team, and then InGame's Red Team automation tool. So they all offer something a little bit different. Some of these are, say, like Red Team automation, and the Atomic Red Team tools are basically just sets of scripts and instructions on how to emulate these techniques in an environment, whereas the other two may come with a VM or a set of VMs and scripts that you actually stand up an environment, and then in that environment these techniques are emulated. But essentially what that allows you to do is, instead of having to manually, one by one, figure out how to kick off that technique within one of the manual tools like an Empire or Coadic or anything like that, you actually have the ability to easily script those techniques just so you're able to observe what they did on an endpoint, able to try and write that detection or that analytic that you'll need to be able to find this in the wild. So an important part of purple teaming is making this a cyclical process, right? So it's not something where it's throwing everything against the wall and see what sticks. It's something that you need to be able to evaluate and measure success over time. So an example of that would be, we did 20 techniques first session that we ever did, and then maybe we don't ever get back to those 20 techniques until we've done enough sessions to kind of cover every technique on the MITRE attack matrix, right? But then when we do get back to that set of 20, and then we're kind of trying to either revamp any current detections we have, maybe a technique's been modified, but it's kind of close to how it existed before. A new binary is also found to be used to emulate that technique or whatever in the wild. What you should be able to do is measure your success and have you improved in your ability to detect that technique over time. Right, so have I, maybe when I very first started this, I kind of had enough data to where I could hunt for, we'll say, some kind of privilege escalation technique. But then over time, what you're able to do is say, hey, this next round of purple team, we actually found out how we could automate some of that, and we actually have an alert now when this process or when this privilege escalation technique is seen in our environment or something like that, so that you're improving on that process over time, right? So. Just a little map of kind of what what this should look like, right? So the first time you're going into that purple team exercise, your concentration is just on writing detections and analytics, like I said. So whether it's I can fully automate this and create an alert for my analysts in our network, or hey, we have the data to hunt for this, so I can write an analytic that helps us carve out some of that data that we're able to collect in our environment and still identify just more in a proactive way, right? That's still a way to detect that threat as long as you're doing those proactive measures. So as you're writing those detections and analytics, the next step would be you need to implement those into ops. And then what's going to happen when you implement them into ops is you're going to have some that are probably really successful and some that are really terrible. And how do you measure that? Probably by false positives and false negatives, right? So false positives being very easy to identify. I created this the automated detection technique for this new hotness technique that was just released a few weeks ago, but then what I find in the process is that maybe it closely aligns with some kind of administrative action or something on my network to where it generates a ton of false positive alerts, right? Like that obvious detection that should be refined, and so you should take that back to testing. So false negatives are obviously way harder to identify, but you will stumble upon in your environment where maybe you've identified an attack of some sort, and then as you're kind of broadening, correlating data about that attack, you find that at one part, they used that privilege escalation technique that you thought you wrote a detection for, or that you ran that hunt for, and you didn't identify, right? So why didn't you identify? That'd be a false negative, something where you can, again, kind of go to that next step where you take those detections and analytics that you've written and refine them, and then re-implement. And then as soon as you're kind of working through that process of refine, re-implementation, then you're going back to writing new detections and new analytics. And the reason you always circle back around to writing new is because things are always changing, right? Like the adversary is trying to stay one step ahead of you. So the adversary, as soon as there's a good set of detections out there for a specific technique, they're going to modify it just a little bit. And again, in the keynote this morning, Dave talked a little bit about this, right? Like all I have to do is modify something. If you're identifying a string of some sort, that's a pretty easy change for an attacker to make, right? So you have to make sure that you're going through those constant refinement of those analytics and then working them back into your daily workflows. So who are these purple teamers? So to kind of really bring to one of my main points in today's talk. So currently, at least in the organizations that I've seen, and then even in the research that I did, kind of leading up to wanting to talk about this, senior security engineers, R&D guys, senior, tier 3 analysts, right? What you're not seeing here are junior analysts, or at least not a lot. They're rarely involved or have a very minor role in purple teaming usually, if any role at all, right? So what I see in a lot of organizations is that tier 1 or tier 2 guy is maybe they're doing some investigating, they're triaging alerts, but then when we step over and we branch into actually leveraging these purple team techniques, it's a couple of the more skilled guys in the shop. They're going through that process fully on their own, emulating techniques, writing detections, kind of working that into the daily ops workflow, and junior analysts kind of see almost none of that other than a new detection when it pops up, right? So what that does is kind of removes the ability for that junior analyst to understand that technique as well as that senior analyst does. So obviously a senior analyst has seen more. That's why they should be running that exercise for sure. They should be in charge of how that's going, right? But having those junior analysts involved is going to drastically increase their ability to identify these techniques in the wild, and I'm speaking from experience there. So how is this being used currently in organizations? So it's not being used by all organizations, obviously. It's either teams haven't been exposed to it enough, or they don't maybe see that it has enough value to kind of be something that they work into their normal flow. They feel like the red team, blue team stuff they do, or the penetration test they do, or whatever exercise that they do as a team are more beneficial than they think purple teaming are, or maybe they're just underexposed to it, not aware of really benefits it'll offer. The two main functions that I see it for where purple teaming is used is either I just want to take my current tool set that I have, say I have Sysmon, I have Security Onion, I have some tools, in my environment. This is what makes up my tool set, and I just need to throw some techniques to see what would this look like in my given tool set. How would I detect it in Security Onion? Or how would I detect it in, with Sysmon logging or anything like that, right? So that's one of its functions. That can be really, really valuable to an analyst, especially if an analyst is new to that tool set, right? Just seeing what that analyst should expect to see when that attack maybe comes across the wire. But more what it's used for, and this is really the power in it, is used for writing those advanced detections and analytics. So not necessarily tool set specific, you're just trying to emulate a technique in a controlled environment where you can collect as much data as possible about that technique, and that gives you the ability to write as good of a detection as you possibly can, right? In doing that, you will likely identify gaps in your coverage, right? You'll say like, I threw this technique and we saw one kind of minor artifact, but it's not something you could accurately identify this with, and that kind of helps you identify those gaps in coverage. So that's mainly what it's used for, is the latter, to help observe everything as that technique comes across the wire, write that advanced detection or analytic. So purple teaming is not new. This has been around for a while. So funny that he mentioned it this morning, as obviously I didn't slides after this morning, but Dave Kennedy, our keynote speaker, he talked about this back at Nauticon like 2014, and right as he's leading in that talk about purple teaming, he's saying, hey, this isn't new to him at that time either, right? Like he had heard several other people talking about purple teaming at the time, and it just hasn't really caught on as far as like enough buy-in for people really finding the value in it to replace the traditional red versus blue and stuff that most organizations still go through. And there's still a function for red versus blue. I'm not saying that there's not. I just feel like purple teaming has additional benefits and kind of some equivalent and some trade-offs as well. So again, this is not new. Some things have definitely changed since, probably the talk back at Nauticon when Dave talked about it, or when purple teaming first came out. One of the things that's changed a lot is attack frameworks, like how much attack frameworks have been built up. That is an extremely useful tool, right? Because without an attack framework to utilize, saying these are the techniques that I have to identify or that I have to map my capabilities against, then really all it is a free-for-all of you choosing what you see either in malware, research articles, anything like that as what is an actual technique in the wild, you categorizing that as what you find important or whatnot, and then those would be the techniques that you emulate, right? But you're always going to miss something there, so having something like MITRE, where we've got that complete attack matrix built out showing all those techniques, really helps us map our capabilities to that as one-for-one mapping. Another thing that's really changed since then, I think, is experience required to kind of do the red piece of this, right? I talked about a little bit with the automation, but I mean, there's a difference in even just with one of the fully automated or with one of the manual tools getting into like a PowerShell Empire, having to learn how to use the modules like, I want to use this persistence module for user land and whatever, right? Like even that is a little bit, on a new analyst would be kind of hard to do, as opposed to in one of the automated frameworks I mentioned, where you legitimately look at, I want to run this technique, I run, Python, persistence, blah, hit enter, and that technique is emulated on my endpoint where I'm deployed, where I have my tool set, and where I'm monitoring for those behaviors, right? It's gotten a lot easier for us to do these purple team activities because of that effort. So appreciates to all the open source community out there that's put all these tools together, because they really, really make it a lot easier for especially smaller teams to go through purple team exercise and be able to kind of scale that exercise and be able to launch that many techniques to where it really is a benefit to them and not something that's too heavy of a workload. So purple teaming can do even more, right? So I've already hit on this a little bit, but I think it has just a huge amount of benefit to a junior analyst. So you could not take a junior analyst and say you are going to go do a purple teaming exercise on your own. That's not a great idea, right? They may not know how to operate in that environment. They may not know how to emulate the techniques, even with the automated tool at first. They may not know all the data that they need to collect. But that effort being guided by a senior analyst, as that senior analyst is going to be going through these purple team efforts anyway, can be so helpful. So some obvious points that I'm going to go ahead and say anyway. Things are easier to identify when you've seen them before, right? I mean, it's one of those muscle memory things, right? Like it's, if I've seen this and I've seen all the artifacts it could leave behind, then I probably have a better idea of how to react to it, what other data to collect, and all those things. So train as you fight. There's a reason train as you fight approach, it's been so popular, especially in the military, but for so long, right? And that's because you're going to fight like you train. So in that red versus blue cyber knife fight environment where, yes, we get good training out of it, but it's very much like not a cyber knife fight that you're going to see in the real world. It's maybe not as helpful to a junior analyst as saying, hey, outside of did I win, did I beat blue team, can I just say that I successfully identified this technique, and when I did, I understood a few things, like all the peripheral artifacts that technique might create. And then also what this is going to do is allow those operators to understand better what that is involved with the MITRE attack matrix. Like, where is this at in the kill chain? Where does this fit into an attacker's, what does this give an attacker on that environment, right? If you're going through all these exercises, it's just enabling those junior analysts to understand that a little bit better than they are when they're just told, sit here and triage alerts, right? So even if it's just semi kind of frequent, running them through these purple team just has so many additional benefits for junior analysts, I feel like. It's also beneficial for red team. So red teamers usually don't like to tell blue teamers what they're going to do before they do it. It's not a practice that's used very much, but it's extremely beneficial to red teamers as well. So I've been talking about this from a complete blue perspective, and a lot of this talk is on the blue side, right? Like on the traditional defender side, but it can be really, really helpful for that attacker to see, hey, when I throw this technique, it actually creates this artifact that I never knew it created before. Maybe if I alter that technique just a little bit and I improve on my own techniques, then it's going to only challenge then blue or during your purple team activities for you to write a better detection for it, right? And you get to see those kinds of things as a red teamer because of the fact that you're also getting to kind of peek in on the blue side where you usually don't see as much. You usually hit that button and then you either get your call back or you don't. You kind of have to figure out where to go from there, right? Like, did it stick against the wall or not? But being able to actually say, okay, I got my call back but then I also see all this additional recorded behavior that I never really understood may have happened in the background before. That can be huge for a red teamer. So another thing is tools. So I'm not saying don't use tools, right? Like red team tools are amazing, so they allow us to not have to carry such a heavy burden of remembering every single thing. And they also make it much, much more manageable to scale a red team engagement, right? Because you can manage hosts so much easier inside of a red team tool, where you can kind of collaborate, list those hosts out, see what you have as far as permissions on hosts. Like they serve a good purpose, but what tools sometimes do is force those red teamers into that mindset of like, I just have to point and click. Like it's that easy, right? Like I can just put in the IP that I know I'm supposed to be going after here, point and click, instead of like actually fully understanding what's going on in the background, right? So again, not saying don't use tools, but then just insight like this is really helpful to understanding what those tools are doing when you hit enter. So it's also beneficial to the blue team to have a red teamer there. Blue team can do this all on their own. They can play red as well. It's going to be really beneficial, obviously, to sit right next to a red teamer who said, no, I've done this technique before. There's a few different ways to do it. We can try them all, see how your detection fits against them all, modify if we need to, and then test again, right? As opposed to like, as the blue teamer, I'm probably going to say, I'm just going to try this one technique that I have right here because I know I can emulate it once, right? So just very, very beneficial for both parties, with red team being involved. All right, so real world examples. So one of the things that I would like to do, I'm going to do a little bit of my giveaway here, but the kind of purpose of these is to be, look at it from a junior analyst perspective. We're going to look at maybe I get an alert. What data would I get with that alert? And then what am I kind of missing there? And how maybe I wouldn't be missing out on that data if I understand the technique. I understand maybe this additional query I need to run, what data I need to correlate, this, that, right? But we'll work through and I'll do some giveaways as we're going through these slides. So, right, we detect a technique. So what, right? I have an alert for UAC bypass. So what does that mean, right? Like I'm going to get some kind of alert data for some, I'm guessing, binary that attempted or successfully executed a UAC bypass, more than likely. So does everybody know UAC, user account control? I'm trying to bypass user account control here. Okay, so alert data. This is not like specific to a certain platform or tool or anything. This is just some generalized what I would get for alert data. In a lot of tools, this is mostly what you'll see, right? You're going to get a process name, process path, PID, parent process name, maybe some command line arguments, signer if you're collecting that kind of stuff on a binary. But so what, right? Like if I'm a tier 1 analyst and I've not gotten time or I've not gotten that exposure to, say, the MITRE attack or really getting to dive into these techniques at all, what does this mean to me? I can quick Google UAC bypass, like, okay, cool, this is a, it's a privilege escalation technique, helpful. Attackers trying to escalate privilege, but still, what now, right? Like, what is my next step as a junior analyst if I'm seeing a technique in the wild that I've never gotten to see before? So, is Event Viewer malicious? Like, Event Viewer is built-in Windows process, right? It's like, so is Event Viewer malicious because the parent process? Like, that's where this came from. Launched what looks to be Mimikatz as a junior analyst. I can kind of understand that looks like Mimikatz to me. Does that make Event Viewer malicious? No. So can anyone tell me what the technique ID is, the MITRE attack technique ID for UAC bypass? Hold on, this is for a wireless adapter. Google is fine. You can Google it. I got a few things to give away, so I'm asking a few questions. So you're going to tell me what the MITRE attack technique ID is for a UAC bypass. It starts with a T. It'll be 4 numbers. Yep, 1088. There you are. All right. Thank you very much.
You know how to Google.
Perfect. Hey, Google's your friend, right? I wouldn't expect anyone to like have fully memorized the attack matrix. I'm sure somebody's done it. I have not. Okay, so MITRE attack technique 1088. Can anyone tell me, is anyone familiar with that technique? Like a nod, show of hands maybe? Okay, so if I'm emulating that attack technique or if I'm actually executing that technique in the wild, can anyone tell me what has to be done before spawning Event Viewer that's going to actually allow you to elevate privileges and bypass UAC? Guesses are fine too. Nope, not run DLL. So it's going to be the addition or modification of something on the endpoint. Nope, modification of the Windows. Nope, starts with an R. Registry. All right, yeah. So, get out over here. Exactly, right? So it's modification of the Windows registry. So it's actually specifically going to be a modification to a registry key. Here you are, sorry. Modification to the registry key containing that MSC file shell open command. So it can be HK current user. It can be a couple different hives, right? But so essentially, you can actually write looking for the modification of this registry key for containing the MSC file shell open command, and then you can actually see. If we're collecting, like just sysmon, I'm collecting registry events, right? You can actually see now this registry event that exists, and you can see process name looks like it's modified by PowerShell. Some kind of, encoded command off PowerShell actually had made that registry modification, right? So without going through this specific, and I'm putting you guys on the spot because obviously you guys didn't go through this exact technique yesterday if you've purple teamed it at all, but without going through that purple team activity looking for this technique, right? Like, how would I know that? How would I, so, if I see that alert, do I think, do I do process lineage on event viewer? Because it can come from something other than the process that actually detonated event viewer. That does not matter at all. The registry key could be added by a completely different parent process, then calls event viewer and spawn this technique. So, without knowing that, okay, well, to confirm this, I should probably go see what file modified that registry key, right? And in doing so, you'll be able to find out, okay, it's PowerShell. So that gives you, as an analyst, a little bit better ability to go in and triage this alert. Hopefully this makes sense to everyone. I'll give you another example here. So I'm going to have another alert, right? So I have an alert for regsvr32 scriptlet execution. So Squibbly-Doo, hopefully you're all familiar with this. This is a fun one by Casey Smith or Sub-T. With this example, so all right, again, we're going to get alert data. So I'm going to get process name, PID, path, command line. I can write a detection purely, basically off of this command line, even though you do have to worry about some string variables, stuff that can change. But so can anyone tell me the MITRE attack technique ID for regserve32 for the practical packet analysis? Sorry, hold on. You said it first, right? Yep. Here, can you? I'm gonna. It's a long walk. Thanks. All right. So yes, it's T1117. All right. Now, more advanced. Hopefully, you're all on the MITRE attack matrix page for the technique ID and ready to help me answer this next question right now, right? Like we're all there. Okay, perfect. We're purple teaming together. Okay, kind of. So what this technique is essentially doing is regserve32 is loading that scripting object DLL and allowing it to execute that con script, which is essentially just an XML file. So whatever code is being executed actually lives in that file. Can anyone tell me the file path where I could go grab that within a short time frame and after this alert? Temporary internet files. Perfect. Exactly. So same thing you would see if you actually had Internet Explorer open and you clicked on a binary and instead of clicking save, you click run. And that file has to obviously temporarily save to a location so that it can be executed, right? So same thing. You'll actually see it saved in temporary internet files. So right, what else? What else do we need? I need that file probably because of the fact that this technique can be, utilized to write code into memory. So if I don't have anything after this point that's actually on disk as that I can help either confirm or deny, like what happened next, how do I confirm this was malicious? Where do I see that code at? You could go grab the file right here. So a quick file search, or if you're collecting file events, right, being able to just search for that file by file name and knowing that it's in the path for temporary internet files. You don't need to know user specific or anything like that. You can quickly pull that data back. You probably likely carved it out in bro logs or something if you're collecting these type of files. So again, I can take that and I could actually see what code. So this is a small section of what that code would look like, right? But then I can say, oh, okay, well, it actually did execute PowerShell temporarily. I can go back and maybe look for this event. Maybe this event didn't alert, but I can go back, do lineage now on this event, kind of look for what came before, what came after. So without, again, seeing that technique and seeing like all of its behaviors, knowing the files that it drops, or the example before, the registry key that it creates, it's kind of hard, really hard for a junior analyst to know, what do I do next when I get this alert, right? And so purple teaming can really, really, really drastically help them in understanding some of these things. So again, it's not going to be like, I know everything because I fully executed purple teaming against the MITRE attack matrix, but it does give you kind of that muscle memory in responding or reacting to some of these techniques when you actually see them in the wild. So what can we, and I say we as a community, what can we do differently, right? So involve analysts of all levels. You know, pros to this obviously are that, again, I've mentioned muscle memory a few times, but that reaction time for an analyst and the ability to either know what to do next or even be able to respond to this if it's something you need to take, you know, remediation actions on right away is going to be much better the second or third time than it was the first time, right? So, you know, help your analysts in understanding what data do I need to correlate, right? Like I said before, what registry key was dropped or modified, or what file was created, or, you know, what user logon event would have had to take place prior to this happening. So then cons, you know, and talking about this with a few fellow analysts, some analysts that are much senior to yours truly, I kind of got everything I'm talking about here with muscle memory and all that stuff, it's kind of saving time, right? In the long run, you know, the time that it takes for your analyst to react to a technique, the time that it takes you to do this or that. And then a con that was brought up was, you know, okay, the time that your senior analysts are then having to invest in, you know, facilitating these exercises with junior analysts that they might be losing to time that's spent writing detection techniques on their own, right? Like they're the experienced ones. They're the ones that could very likely just do this on their own without involving junior analysts at all. My argument to that would be, yes, you're probably right in the beginning. You're going to lose a little bit of time as a senior analyst, and maybe the frequency that you're able to, you know, like maybe emulate some techniques in a given purple teaming activity. But over time, all you're doing is building more purple teamers, right? So over time, you will catch up that speed and probably eventually surpass it because you've created a much larger purple team, right, that has the ability to do this. And maybe they're working on refining tactics and not always doing it on creating new, but at the same time, more people, the quicker that's going to go as well. So I really think you can utilize purple teaming to elevate your analyst, right? Part of my title of my talk, I think that you know, you have to help your analysts grow, right? Like you have to facilitate an environment where you allow them to engage in these activities and kind of alleviate that so what, or, you know, that mindset, right, of an analyst. Like I see this in training all the time. I said in my intro of myself, I do a ton of training. And so that's one of the major things that I see is, you know, I teach someone how to see something, you know, specific to our product or not, and the next thing I get is, why do I care, right? And so you can kind of alleviate that by giving them the background on the technique that you're trying to teach them to identify in the wild. So you're going to elevate your workforce, right? You're going to give them that tools and experience by including them in this, and then, you know, you're just essentially get them to look beyond the alert, give them the ability to know, you know, what's my next step, what do I do to correlate data, what do I do to triage. So we can also do more, I feel like, in the daily operations that purple teaming can help us with daily ops. You know, testing these techniques, I said this a little bit earlier, you're going to identify either holes that you have in coverage, or you might also identify things that you can, you know, fully automate, or things that are harder for you to catch, but you can do them in hunting. You know, and that can help you build what is known as a heat map, which in turn can help you build your playbook. So in building your own playbook, you know, emulation of these techniques can help you build that heat map. And I'm just piggybacking off of Roberto Rodriguez. I don't know if you guys have read. If you've not read How Hot is Your Hunt Team, great article about mapping your hunt team's capabilities to a framework such as MITRE, right? So we can do the same kind of thing here, and I, a little bit different than Roberto when he talks about it, but I'm primarily focusing on when I write a detection or an analytic, do I have something that's fully automated, as in it's going to alert, when it alerts I can take the response action on that alert, or do I have something that maybe has a little bit of alert functionality, but maybe we're missing some data to always know I have a true positive there. Do I have no detection functionality at all, but I do collect enough data to where I can hunt for it? So a lot of times this might be the case with things you might try and create a detection for and they have a false positive, like the data is there, but the detection you write has too high of a false positive rate. You may just have to do that as a proactive search. But then either, maybe partial data or, like I think I can identify that technique, but I really may not have enough data in general to fully guarantee that that's what you're seeing when you see it. Or just, I don't have enough data, I don't have a tool that even fits that mold or this technique of what we're trying to identify. I wouldn't have that capability. So when you map those out, now this is just a random example of like what that could look like on the MITRE attack matrix. You've mapped those down, okay, for these techniques I can actually, I have a fully automated detection in which I can rely on an alert to tell me if this is happening in my environment versus, what's more manual or what am I not able to do at all in my environment. And it's very, very important to understand where those gaps are. So identifying strengths and weaknesses, it's going to help you build that ops playbook. So ops can't be like telling your analyst just to go find what's bad on the network, right? There should be a given set of, of instructions or like tasks that an analyst at each level has to complete each day, whether that's triaging alerts or hunting for something or, like collecting more data so that you can dig through it and hunt later on. But those tasks can essentially be mapped out to identify the, like, review and triage, automated detections, hunt for techniques, figure out a way to collect that additional data. So for these first two, specifically, there should be a prioritization of efforts, right? So when you're looking at alerts that I'm triaging or techniques that I'm hunting for, efforts should be prioritized. So different techniques have different severities, have different, right? So it might be where an attacker is at in the attack life cycle. Maybe it's more severe to me if an attacker is closer to exfil than it is if it's like the first execution event I've seen, because it's several actions on objectives deep at that point, right? Or maybe it's more more severe to me, sorry, if it's execution event than it is a discovery, because I know execution means, hey, probably pretty close to initial access, malicious code getting executed in some way, shape, or form on my box, whereas discovery means, that attacker is basically doing some situational awareness, maybe trying to move laterally or trying to discover what resources they have access to, right? But either way, like, this is a determination that's made up of what's important on your team and how you categorize that, but it's taking what's important for you as techniques to identify, correlating that with what you do well and what you don't do well, and that should help you build your priority list, right? So if there's something that's very important to me and it's something that I have to do manually, that manual piece should be built into one of your higher tiered analyst playbook every single day, right? Give you the, like, utmost confidence in identifying those techniques. So in an ideal world where I have a strongly enough manned team that I can, say I could treat every technique as equal, you make that prioritization on your own. In less mature SOCs or teams, you might actually need the ability to have that driven by intelligence. And so when I say that, I'll bring up the CAR, which is the Cyber Analytics Repository Exploration Tool. So just as an example here, I can use this to kind of map out, let's say I'm a financial institution and I want to look at threats like Lazarus Group, which mainly targets financial institutions, and what that'll do is actually map out, okay, these are the main techniques used by that adversary, and there's more than one that you would have to do this for, but just saying you can use, especially for undermanned team where it's hard to treat every technique as equal, you can use this kind of intelligence-driven data to help you prioritize what you should be, as important in your environment, right? So, I think that everyone here could benefit from either, purple teaming or maybe taking purple teaming efforts that you're doing and, involving those junior analysts. So having that cyclical process, like I talked about earlier, to make sure that, you keep pace with your adversary. Your adversary is always advancing their TTPs. They may not always use advanced TTPs if you don't force them to. If you have, like SMB open to the internet, that's pretty easy for an adversary. But as you force adversaries to use more advanced techniques, they will create new ways to get into your environment or move laterally in your environment, or to exfil from your environment, or whatever that is, right? And so having that process of going back through, reiterating through new techniques, writing new detections, make sure that you're keeping pace. And MITRE does a great job of keeping that updated, and the community is really great, especially all the security researchers in this community, about sharing that stuff. Squibbly Do is a good example. The RedSurf32 attack I showed, where sub-T, hey, I found this, this is what you're able to do with it, and then not very long after, APT32 is seen using it in real-world attacks all over. So really, really good, useful of making sure they're keeping up with those techniques as they get added. Through utilizing Purple Team, your teams are going to get your personnel, your analysts, going to get better understanding of things like the attack matrix, right? What does this mean for an attacker if I'm in this stage of the life cycle? What does this privilege escalation technique do for me? Is it hard to emulate? Is it easier in a certain environment? Any of those things. So they'll get a better understanding for those manual processes of how hard it is, to go through those detections, and then how to correlate data, right? So that's an important piece to me that I think junior analysts take away from this more than anything is, I've seen this attack before. I know when this happens, it does X, Y, or Z, and I can correlate that data that you might not be able to collect in every alert, right? You can only put so much data in an alert to give to an analyst to show this something happened, and that analyst has to have some way to know how to go ahead and correlate those techniques, correlate that data to the technique that's been identified. So, in closing here, so purple teaming is a practice that I think, organizations of all sizes and all manpower should be at least attempting to emulate or attempting to act on. Doing these exercises inside your environment, it's going to do nothing but benefit your junior analysts. There's a lot of, it's really, really easy to get started. You're going to improve your analysts' abilities and your team's capabilities overall as you not only build more capable analysts, but better purple teamers who can do a better job of keeping up with those recent threats, right? And making sure that you have detections, you have analytics to identify all of those in the wild. And again, the last point I'll make again, it is very easy to get started with all of the open source tooling and documentation kind of guidance that's out there right now. And so I just think it's very, very valuable and still pretty much underutilized in most organizations currently. So that is all I have for you. So I have a couple more things of swag to give away if you'll give me another 2 minutes. I just wanted to walk through another couple of examples. I'll give some people a chance to Google again, or maybe redeem themselves as we ask a few questions here. So I'll try and keep these easy. So who likes lateral movement? Yeah, everybody likes lateral movement, right? How about WMI lateral movement? Okay, so if an attacker uses WMI to move laterally to another endpoint, what port is that going to initiate with on that distant endpoint? A corner over there? Nope. Nope. Not 389, not 53. You're all kind of close. Sure. No? So, okay, who said 135 first? All right, there you are. I have a USB pin for you here in the front. All right. So let's just walk through this. I probably have admin right if I'm utilizing or able to use WMI to move laterally across the environment. So then what Windows event ID would I expect to see for a successful admin logon on that endpoint? No, so that would be a successful logon. No. I mean, you can Google it, like I said, admin logon. 4624 is a successful logon event. 4672. Perfect. I have a USB pin for you. All right, so I'll go ahead and end it on this last question for a nice little in-game notebook. What would you expect the parent process to be on that endpoint whenever it spawns that process call create command or that built-in PowerShell WMI command? Say I spawn calc using WMI on that distant endpoint. What's going to be the parent process? Nope. It starts with WMI. I'll give you that. Nope, not WMIC. WMIC could be used to initiate this command, but what's it going to look like on the distant end? Who just said that? WMI PRVSE, which is WMI provisioning host. So I like going through these examples because kind of what you work through, things you learn as a purple teamer, right? And you get to see these techniques happen in the wild. You get to record all those events, and you get to hopefully kind of keep this as knowledge or Google it like everyone else does. So thank you guys very much. I appreciate you coming out to my talk. Hope you liked it.